The night of the gala was sparkling with lights, laughter, and the low hum of soft classical music playing in the background. The hall was filled with people who had everything they could ever want: luxury cars, designer dresses, and powerful positions in business. Among them, a young girl, Aaliyah, entered quietly but confidently, holding her father's hand. She was dressed simply yet elegantly, her dress flowing lightly as she walked and her eyes shining with curiosity and determination. She could feel the energy in the room, the tension between competition and charm. And even though she was only 17, she carried herself as if she belonged. Her father, Mr. Thompson, was a self-made CEO in the tech world. He had started with nothing and had worked day and night to build his company. Now it was worth billions, and people around him often underestimated the man behind the fortune. He was calm, polite, and observant. When he saw people whispering and looking at his daughter in ways that were too curious, he adjusted his stance. He knew how people could be cruel when they felt threatened by someone's potential. Aaliyah had grown up watching her father build his empire. She had learned from him how to read a room, how to notice small details, and how to stay composed even when people tried to undermine you. She wasn't just a girl who was tagging along. She was learning the nuances of power, influence, and self-respect. As they walked into the grand hall, Aaliyah noticed a wealthy family that everyone seemed to admire and fear in the business world. They were tall, polished, and dressed in clothes that screamed money. Their smiles were charming, but there was a sharpness in their eyes, a sense of superiority that made others feel small. Aaliyah could feel them staring, not in curiosity but in judgment. Her father noticed too, and he offered a polite nod, knowing well that introductions were only the beginning of unspoken power plays. The family didn't wait long to make their presence felt. One of the daughters, dressed in a glittering gown, approached Aaliyah and made a comment about her appearance. At first it seemed like a casual joke, but there was a sharpness in her tone, a sting that was meant to belittle. Aaliyah smiled politely, refusing to respond in anger, but inside she felt the heat of injustice. She had faced prejudice before, and she knew this was the same old arrogance, the same dismissive attitude that people sometimes threw at her because of her skin color and her youth. Her father stayed close, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He whispered softly that she didn't need to respond unless she wanted to, and that sometimes the best way to handle ignorance was with calm confidence. Aaliyah took a deep breath, letting the tension ease slightly. She looked at the other members of the family, noticing how they whispered and laughed, trying to make themselves seem superior. She realized that they had no idea who they were dealing with. Throughout the evening, Aaliyah observed the interactions in the room carefully. She noticed subtle cues, the way some people flinched when they spoke too boldly, the way some nodded too quickly, and the way others tried to impress the rich family with shallow compliments. She learned more in these few hours than most people learn in weeks. It was like being in a living classroom where every gesture, every word, every expression had meaning. At one point, a member of the wealthy family made a joke at Aaliyah's expense, about her being too young to understand business matters. They laughed, thinking it was clever and harmless. Aaliyah paused, then calmly corrected them with a fact about one of her father's recent business achievements. The room went quiet for a moment. Her father gave her a small, approving nod, proud that she had spoken up with intelligence rather than anger. Even a few onlookers whispered quietly, impressed by her poise. The wealthy family didn't like being corrected. They had spent their lives surrounded by people who nodded and smiled, never challenging them. Here was a young girl who had every reason to be intimidated, yet she stood her ground politely but firmly. The tension grew, subtle but undeniable. Some guests avoided looking at Aaliyah, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, while others leaned in to see what would happen next. As the evening continued, Aaliyah and her father moved through the crowd, talking to various guests, exchanging polite greetings, and discussing business lightly. But the wealthy family followed, watching and whispering, clearly trying to assert dominance. Aaliyah noticed the glances and smirks, the way they tried to undermine her in conversation by making small, dismissive remarks. She ignored them outwardly, but inside she felt a quiet fire. This wasn't about anger. It was about dignity and respect. At one point, a member of the wealthy family tried to lure Mr. Thompson into a conversation about a potential $500 million deal. They spoke with charm, offering opportunities and perks assuming that money would make him overlook the earlier disrespect. Alia listened closely, understanding that business was more than numbers. It was strategy, patience, and the ability to read people. Her father listened politely but did not commit to anything. He asked questions that revealed the character of the family, subtly testing their values without showing any aggression. Alia saw the discomfort on their faces when they realized he wasn't as easily swayed as they thought. The room seemed to shrink around them, the polite hum of conversation turning into a silent observation of the power dynamics unfolding. Throughout the evening, Alia and her father shared small moments of connection. They laughed softly at jokes no one else would understand. They exchanged subtle nods when someone spoke cleverly, and they walked together as a team, showing unity and mutual respect. It was a quiet but powerful display, one that contrasted sharply with the arrogance of the wealthy family. As the gala neared its end, the wealthy family became bolder in their taunts, assuming they had the upper hand because of their fortune and reputation. They underestimated Alia's composure and her father's principles. When they made a particularly cutting remark about her appearance and her family's background, Alia calmly responded with a statement about integrity and hard work, leaving the room briefly silent. Even a few of their allies seemed uncomfortable, realizing they had crossed an invisible line. Her father felt a mixture of pride and concern. He was proud of Alia for standing up with grace, but he also recognized that their actions could have business consequences. He had built his empire on hard work, intelligence, and ethical principles. Money had never been the only measure of success. Respect and integrity mattered even more. As they left the gala, Alia felt a mix of emotions: pride, validation, and a quiet sense of anticipation. She knew this encounter was just the beginning, that the wealthy family would not easily forget being challenged by a young girl. She also knew that her father's actions in the coming days would set the tone for how they approached business, ethics, and respect. The night sky outside glittered with city lights as they stepped into the car. Alia looked out the window, reflecting on the events. She realized that power was not just about wealth. It was about character, courage, and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Her father's hand rested gently on hers, a silent message of support and understanding. They both knew that the real story was just beginning, and that the choices they made in the next hours and days could change the course of their business and personal lives. Inside the car, they reviewed the night quietly. Alia asked questions about business ethics, about the reactions of the guests, and about the subtle ways power and arrogance were displayed. Her father answered patiently, explaining the importance of observation, patience, and strategy. He reminded her that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned, and sometimes it required standing firm even when it was uncomfortable. The gala had shown Alia that courage came in many forms. It wasn't about yelling or showing anger. It was about poise, intelligence, and self-respect. She realized that sometimes the people who appear most powerful are the easiest to challenge, if you approach them with clarity and confidence. She also understood that her father's guidance would be crucial in the coming days, as business opportunities and ethical decisions collided. As they reached home, Alia felt a quiet sense of determination. She knew that the wealthy family would soon attempt to assert their influence in business dealings. But she also knew that she and her father were prepared. Their unity, intelligence, and ethical grounding would guide them through whatever came next. The night had been challenging, but it had also been a lesson in courage, observation, and the power of standing up with dignity. In the following days, the events of the gala began to ripple through their business world. People who had witnessed Alia's composure whispered about her confidence. Some admired her courage, others respected her father's restraint. The wealthy family, however, underestimated the long-term impact. They assumed that a minor social slight would be forgotten quickly, never realizing that the fire they had sparked would soon lead to consequences they could not ignore. Alia spent the next few days reflecting on the evening, taking notes on human behavior, learning about subtle power dynamics, and preparing herself for the next encounter. Her father supported her quietly, sharing lessons about patience, timing, and the importance of ethics in business. They both knew that the real test was yet to come, and that their next moves could shape the outcome of a $500 million deal. The gala had been more than a social event. It had been a masterclass in observation, strategy, and integrity. Aaliyah had learned that courage and respect could coexist with intelligence and calmness. And most importantly, she had learned that her actions, even as a young woman, could influence the course of powerful decisions. The story of that night would stay with her forever, shaping her understanding of business, power, and dignity in ways she would carry into the future. After the gala, the days that followed were filled with reflection, strategy, and quiet determination. Mr. Thompson, the CEO, found himself thinking constantly about the wealthy family and their behavior toward Aaliyah. He had spent decades building his company, establishing himself in an industry where respect was earned through intelligence, diligence, and integrity. Yet he knew that wealth could blind people, making them believe that money alone gave them the right to demean others. In his office, surrounded by walls lined with books and awards, he sat with his closest advisors. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting a warm glow on the polished wood of the room. Everyone could feel the weight of the upcoming decision. The $500 million deal with the wealthy family's conglomerate was not a small matter. It was massive, life-changing, and potentially transformative for his company. But it had to be considered carefully, not just in terms of money, but in terms of ethics, values, and the message it would send to the world. He explained to his team how the family had taunted his daughter. The advisors listened, some shaking their heads, others quietly analyzing the situation. One senior strategist spoke up, noting that deals like this are usually about power and negotiation, not personal feelings. He cautioned that letting emotion guide the business could risk the opportunity. Mr. Thompson listened carefully, but countered with a calm argument. Respect and ethics were part of the foundation of his company. If they partnered with a family who had no regard for these principles, it would reflect poorly not only on him, but on the team, the employees, and the culture they had worked so hard to build. Aaliyah, sitting quietly nearby, listened to every word. She was learning more than she ever had in a classroom. She saw the strategy behind every comment, every piece of advice, and she understood the balance between emotion and logic. Even though she was young, she grasped the importance of values in business, and she admired her father's commitment to integrity over quick financial gain. She knew that many people in the world would choose money first, but her father had shown her that some things were more important than wealth. Meanwhile, the wealthy family was busy preparing for the next steps. They assumed their behavior at the gala was just a minor incident and that the deal would proceed as planned. They did not understand that underestimating someone's principles or mocking someone's dignity could have consequences far beyond their imagination. Their focus was on numbers, investments, and prestige, but they failed to see the human aspect, the ethics, and the respect that mattered in business relationships. In the days that followed, Mr. Thompson began reaching out to his legal team and financial advisors, reviewing every aspect of the potential deal. He examined every clause, every requirement, and considered what changes could be implemented to ensure that the partnership would align with his company's values. He knew that if they went ahead without addressing the disrespect shown at the gala, it would set a dangerous precedent. His employees and stakeholders needed to see that integrity mattered, that the culture of the company could not be compromised for money. Aaliyah watched as her father navigated complex negotiations, and she learned the subtle art of influence and strategy. She observed how he spoke calmly but firmly, how he anticipated objections, and how he addressed concerns without raising his voice. Each meeting became a lesson, each conversation a chance to understand the importance of preparation, patience, and subtle power. She began taking notes not on paper but in her mind, remembering key points about human behavior, ethics, and negotiation. One evening, while they were reviewing documents at home, Aaliyah asked a thoughtful question. She wanted to know why they couldn't simply walk away from the deal entirely. Her father smiled softly. He explained that in business, every interaction is an opportunity to set standards, to lead by example, and to influence others. Walking away might seem easy, but carefully considering the approach could teach the wealthy family a lesson without aggression or humiliation. He wanted to show that integrity was not weakness, it was strength. The next few days were filled with careful communication. Mr. Thompson sent polite but firm emails to the wealthy family, arranging another meeting to discuss the deal. He requested that they be prepared to address issues of respect, accountability, and ethical practices, subtly signaling that the behavior at the gala was unacceptable. He did not insult or attack them directly. Instead, he framed the conversation around the long-term success and reputation of the partnership. Aaliyah helped by practicing questions and responses with her father. She learned how to anticipate reactions, how to respond with poise, and how to use intelligence as a tool for influence. Her confidence grew with every discussion, and her father quietly observed, proud of her understanding and maturity. She began to understand that business was not just about money. It was about people, values, and the choices you make when faced with challenges. The day of the meeting arrived. Mr. Thompson entered the conference room with Aaliyah beside him. The wealthy family was already there, dressed in their finest attire with smiles that attempted to mask their arrogance. They assumed that Mr. Thompson's presence was merely formal and that he would sign the deal as expected. But Aaliyah noticed the tension in their eyes, the subtle discomfort when they remembered the incident at the gala. It was not overt, but she could sense it. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The meeting began with polite introductions, handshakes, and small talk. Mr. Thompson calmly shifted the conversation toward the deal, asking questions about their objectives, goals, and expectations. Aaliyah listened, observing the responses, noting the way they spoke about money, prestige, and power. She noticed a disconnect between their words and their actions, a subtle arrogance that failed to acknowledge the human aspect of business. Her father, however, remained composed, using every answer to guide the discussion toward ethics and accountability. As the conversation progressed, Mr. Thompson introduced a clause he had added to the proposed contract. It required public acknowledgement of diversity initiatives, ethical conduct in all business dealings, and respect for employees at all levels. The wealthy family reacted with visible surprise. They had assumed the contract would be straightforward, focused only on money and returns. The inclusion of ethical clauses caught them off guard, revealing their discomfort with principles they had never prioritized. Aaliyah observed quietly as the family debated internally, their polite smiles faltering. She could sense the shift in power, the way her father's calm authority was challenging their assumptions. One of the family members attempted to dismiss the clause as unnecessary, suggesting that ethics were secondary to financial success. Aaliyah interjected softly but firmly, pointing out how respect, accountability, and integrity were not obstacles but essential foundations for long-term success. Her words were measured, intelligent, and unassuming, but they carried weight. The room fell into a momentary silence. Some of the family members whispered among themselves, clearly unsure how to respond. Aaliyah's father gave a subtle nod of approval, acknowledging her contribution without drawing attention to it. The dynamic had shifted. The wealthy family could no longer rely on arrogance and intimidation. They had underestimated the combination of experience, intelligence, and ethical grounding represented by Mr. Thompson and his daughter. Over the next hour, the discussion continued. Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah carefully addressed every objection, demonstrating that the clauses were not punitive but essential for maintaining a successful and respectful partnership. They emphasized the importance of reputation, employee satisfaction, and long-term trust. Aaliyah could see the discomfort growing as the wealthy family realized they were being challenged, not by anger or confrontation, but by competence, calm, and unwavering principles. The meeting ended with no immediate agreement. The wealthy family left, visibly shaken but trying to maintain composure. Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah returned home, discussing the encounter in detail. They analyzed every reaction, every word, and every subtle sign of discomfort. Aaliyah learned that true influence did not come from aggression or wealth, but from intelligence, preparation, and ethical courage. Her father reinforced the lesson, reminding her that sometimes the strongest victories are those that do not involve confrontation, but careful strategy and unwavering principles. In the following days, news of the meeting began to circulate quietly among business circles. People admired the firm stance taken by Mr. Thompson and the composed, intelligent participation of Aaliyah. Some competitors and colleagues began to recognize that wealth alone did not determine influence or respect. Integrity and ethical grounding mattered just as much, if not more. Aaliyah spent the evenings reflecting on the events, taking mental notes and preparing herself for what could come next. She understood that the wealthy family would not easily accept being challenged, but she also knew that their behavior would soon have consequences. Her father, always patient, encouraged her to continue observing, learning, and understanding the subtle ways power and respect interacted in the world of business. As part 2 of their story unfolded, it became clear that money, arrogance, and status could not overshadow dignity, intelligence, and ethical leadership. Aaliyah had learned more than she ever imagined in those days, about negotiation, human behavior, and the quiet strength of standing firm without aggression. Her father's guidance, combined with her own growing confidence, prepared them both for the challenges and triumphs that lay ahead, setting the stage for a remarkable outcome that would soon surprise everyone involved. The morning of the next scheduled meeting arrived, with a quiet tension hanging in the air. Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah were both prepared, knowing that the wealthy family would attempt to regain control of the situation. They understood that power often came from intimidation, wealth, and public image, but the lessons of the previous gala and follow-up discussions had taught them to remain calm, measured, and focused on principles rather than confrontation. They arrived at the private conference room early, the city skyline visible through the large glass windows. The room was filled with polished wood furniture, state-of-the-art technology, and an air of formality. Mr. Thompson set up his notes, legal documents, and presentation slides, while Aaliyah quietly observed, mentally preparing herself to engage with the family if necessary. They were a team, united in purpose and aware that this encounter would define not only the deal, but also the character and ethics of everyone involved. When the wealthy family arrived, they exuded confidence. They had prepared presentations, charts, and glossy reports, believing that their financial influence would easily secure agreement. Their smiles were polite but guarded, a reflection of their unspoken awareness that they were entering a more challenging situation than they had anticipated. As they settled into their seats, Aaliyah noticed the subtle glances, the brief pauses, and the shift in tone. The previous events had left a mark, and they were wary of being underestimated. The meeting began with the usual formalities, polite greetings, and small talk. Mr. Thompson acknowledged their achievements and contributions to the industry, setting a tone of respect and professionalism. Aaliyah observed keenly, noting how people react when flattery is balanced with expectation and clarity. She understood that business interactions were layered with subtle cues, and she was beginning to master the art of observation and influence. As the conversation moved to the deal itself, Mr. Thompson calmly introduced the clauses he had prepared regarding ethics, accountability, and respect. The wealthy family's initial reactions were polite but skeptical. They attempted to dismiss the clauses as unnecessary formalities, claiming that their reputation and experience should speak for themselves. Mr. Thompson responded with quiet firmness, explaining that clear agreements and accountability were essential to ensure long-term success and mutual respect. Aaliyah spoke up when appropriate, presenting insights on how ethical practices could enhance the company's public image and improve employee satisfaction. Her words were concise, intelligent, and poised. She did not speak to challenge for the sake of confrontation, but to provide perspective and clarity. Some board members on the other side of the table exchanged glances, impressed by her composure and thoughtful reasoning. Tension grew gradually as the wealthy family realized they were not in familiar territory. They had expected compliance, admiration, and deference, but instead encountered a structured, principled approach that refused to compromise on dignity and respect. Mr. Thompson guided the discussion with patience, answering questions, addressing concerns, and gently steering the conversation toward ethical alignment without creating conflict. During a critical moment, one of the family members questioned the relevance of the diversity and ethical clauses, suggesting that financial gain should be the primary concern. Aaliyah interjected, explaining in simple, compelling terms that respect and inclusivity were not obstacles but opportunities for sustainable growth. She highlighted examples from her father's company, where ethical practices had led to higher productivity, better employee retention, and positive public perception. The family members paused, some nodding subtly, realizing the validity of her points. As the hours passed, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The wealthy family, initially confident and dismissive, began to display signs of discomfort. Their polished exterior began to crack under the realization that their assumptions about wealth and influence were insufficient to secure agreement. Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah's calm, strategic approach had challenged their worldview, forcing them to consider principles they had previously ignored. Aaliyah noticed small details that others might have missed: the tightening of a jaw, the slight hesitation before speaking, the flicker of doubt in eyes accustomed to unquestioned authority. These observations reinforced her understanding of human behavior and the subtle dynamics of power. She realized that influence was often more about perception and strategic communication than brute force or wealth. At one point, the discussion turned to a potential timeline for the deal. The wealthy family suggested a quick closure, assuming that urgency would pressure compliance. Mr. Thompson countered with a measured approach, explaining that careful planning and adherence to ethical standards would ensure a more successful, sustainable partnership. Aaliyah supported this stance, providing examples of how rushed decisions in other ventures had led to mistakes and reputational damage. Their reasoning was logical, clear, and rooted in real-world evidence, making it difficult for the other side to argue effectively. The conversation then shifted to employee treatment and workplace culture. The wealthy family initially assumed their success justified any management style, but Mr. Thompson highlighted the long-term benefits of respect, inclusivity, and accountability. Aaliyah added insights about mentoring, talent retention, and the importance of creating an environment where employees feel valued and heard. Her points were delivered with quiet authority, demonstrating that age and youth were irrelevant when paired with intelligence and thoughtful perspective. Throughout the meeting, Mr. Thompson maintained a steady, composed demeanor, occasionally exchanging subtle nods with Aaliyah. Their synergy was evident. They complemented each other's strengths, presenting a unified front that combined experience, insight, and ethical clarity. The wealthy family found themselves on the defensive, realizing that their usual tactics of charm, intimidation, and wealth were insufficient to sway decisions based on principle. As the hours wore on, the wealthy family began to reconsider their position. Some members whispered among themselves, clearly aware that continuing to push aggressively would be unwise. Aaliyah noticed their hesitation and understood that they were beginning to recognize the consequences of underestimating both her and her father. She felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, not from triumph, but from seeing that careful strategy, intelligence, and ethical grounding were making a real difference. The meeting concluded without a final agreement. The wealthy family left with polite farewells, but the atmosphere was unmistakably different from when they had arrived. They had experienced, for the first time, a situation in which wealth alone could not dictate terms. Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah returned to their office, discussing the encounter and analyzing every detail. They recognized that the negotiation had been a success in terms of influence and strategy, even if the deal had not been signed immediately. In the following days, Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah reviewed the meeting notes, highlighting key points, responses, and areas for future discussion. They planned their next steps carefully, preparing to respond to any attempts by the wealthy family to regain control of the situation. Aaliyah continued to learn, observing how her father combined strategic thinking with ethical leadership, turning potential conflict into opportunity for influence and understanding. Word of the meeting began to spread subtly within business circles. People admired the principled stance taken by Mr. Thompson and the composed intelligence demonstrated by Aaliyah. Colleagues and competitors alike began to see that wealth alone was not the ultimate measure of power. Integrity, respect, and thoughtful strategy mattered as much, if not more. The story of the meeting became a quiet example of how courage and principle could shift dynamics even in the high-stakes world of business. Aaliyah spent evenings reflecting on what she had observed. She considered the balance between patience and action, between observation and participation. She realized that influence often came from subtlety, from the ability to remain composed, anticipate reactions, and communicate with clarity. Her father reinforced these lessons, emphasizing that true power was grounded in respect, intelligence, and ethical behavior. The wealthy family, meanwhile, was forced to reconsider their approach. They could not rely solely on wealth or arrogance to achieve their objectives. The experience had revealed vulnerabilities, gaps in understanding, and the importance of aligning actions with values. Some members were defensive, others reflective, but all were aware that the previous assumptions about dominance and influence had been challenged in a way they had not expected. As part 3 of the story unfolded, it became clear that the coming days would be crucial. The wealthy family had been confronted with a situation in which their usual strategies were ineffective, and they would need to reassess their approach. Aliyah and her father, meanwhile, continued to prepare, knowing that the next encounter could determine the outcome of the potential deal. They remained focused on principles, strategy, and mutual respect, aware that patience, intelligence, and composure were their greatest assets. In quiet moments at home, Aliyah reflected on the lessons she had learned, the importance of observation, the power of ethical leadership, and the impact of clear communication. She recognized that courage was not always about confrontation, but about standing firm in one's values and using intelligence and composure to influence others. Her father encouraged her to continue thinking critically, to ask questions and to anticipate challenges, reinforcing the idea that true learning often came from real-world experiences rather than textbooks. By the end of part 3, both Mr. Thompson and Aliyah understood that the wealthy family's underestimation of them had set the stage for a pivotal moment. They had demonstrated that integrity, intelligence, and calm authority could shift dynamics in ways that wealth alone could. The days after the second meeting were filled with careful consideration, strategizing, and reflection for both Mr. Thompson and Aliyah. They understood that the wealthy family was struggling to process the unexpected outcome of the previous encounter. They had assumed that wealth and status would automatically secure agreement, but now they realized that principles, integrity, and intelligent negotiation could not be dismissed. This realization brought a quiet satisfaction to Aliyah, who had been learning firsthand how strategic patience and calm composure could influence even the most confident adversaries. Mr. Thompson spent mornings reviewing legal documents and contracts, ensuring that every possible scenario had been considered. His advisors assisted in analyzing financial projections, potential risks, and strategic contingencies. He knew that while the deal was substantial, the long-term reputation and culture of his company could not be compromised. Wealth without principles, he often reminded himself, was not truly valuable. Aliyah, though still young, took part in discussions, observing closely and offering insights when appropriate. She had developed a keen sense of timing and observation, understanding how subtle influence could change outcomes in powerful ways. Meanwhile, the wealthy family convened privately to discuss the situation. Their initial confidence had been shaken. Some members suggested that they ignore the clauses about ethics and diversity, hoping that Mr. Thompson would relent. Others, however, began to see that underestimating someone based on assumptions of wealth and social status could be a costly mistake. The family's internal debates reflected the first signs of tension and uncertainty that wealth could not erase. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was beginning to affect their decision-making. As the final meeting day approached, Mr. Thompson prepared to take a decisive stance. He knew that his actions would set the tone for the rest of the negotiations, and that this would be a test not only of business acumen, but also of personal integrity. He reviewed every detail of the contract and prepared to present a clear, firm, and ethical path forward. Aliyah, practicing quietly at his side, was ready to support him if necessary, confident that her knowledge, composure, and insights could contribute meaningfully to the discussion. The meeting began with polite greetings and handshakes, but there was a noticeable difference in energy from previous encounters. The wealthy family arrived with cautious optimism, aware that they could no longer rely on assumptions of compliance. Mr. Thompson introduced the meeting with calm professionalism, emphasizing the importance of respect, accountability, and ethical behavior in any partnership. He carefully outlined the terms of the contract and highlighted the clauses related to diversity, ethical conduct, and employee treatment, explaining that these were not optional add-ons but essential foundations for a successful and sustainable collaboration. The wealthy family attempted to argue, presenting financial data and examples of previous deals, hoping to demonstrate that ethical clauses were unnecessary. Mr. Thompson listened patiently and responded with clear reasoning. He emphasized that integrity was not a barrier to success, but a key to long-term trust and growth. Aliyah supported him, adding insights about employee satisfaction, public perception, and corporate culture. Her words were thoughtful, precise, and delivered with confidence, demonstrating that she had learned the importance of careful observation, timing, and ethical reasoning. As the discussion progressed, the wealthy family became increasingly defensive. They had assumed that Mr. Thompson would eventually prioritize money over principle, but they were confronted with the reality that ethical considerations were central to his company's values. Their initial arrogance and dismissiveness began to wane, replaced by a growing recognition that they could not control the outcome through wealth alone. Aliyah noted the subtle changes, the hesitant gestures, the flicker of doubt, the quiet murmurs of disagreement within the family. The shift in power dynamics was tangible even if unspoken. At a critical moment, Mr. Thompson calmly stated that the deal could only proceed if the ethical clauses were fully acknowledged and implemented. He emphasized that respect for his daughter, for employees, and for proper business conduct was non-negotiable. The room fell silent as the wealthy family realized the gravity of his words. Their smiles faltered, and a few members whispered among themselves, trying to navigate a situation they had not anticipated. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that wealth could not override principles, and that underestimating someone's integrity could have severe consequences. Aliyah observed quietly, sensing the tension in the room. She understood that her presence, combined with her father's calm authority, had altered the expected outcome. She did not need to speak further. The message was clear. Principles, dignity, and intelligent negotiation had created a situation in which the wealthy family's previous assumptions were no longer valid. The quiet strength of integrity was proving to be more powerful than the influence of money alone. After hours of discussion, the decision became clear. Mr. Thompson formally canceled the deal. He explained that the ethical misalignment and the earlier disrespect toward his daughter could not be overlooked, regardless of the financial opportunity. The wealthy family protested politely, but the decision was final and legally binding. There was no room for compromise on matters of principle. The reaction in the room was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and reluctant acknowledgement. Some of the family members attempted to rationalize the situation, while others quietly accepted the consequences of their actions. Mr. Thompson and Aliyah remained composed, demonstrating that decisions rooted in integrity could be made without hostility or aggression. They left the meeting with a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that the choice to uphold ethical standards had immediate and long-term significance. As news of the cancellation spread, reactions within the business community were immediate. Colleagues, competitors, and industry observers admired the courage and integrity demonstrated by Mr. Thompson and the poise of Aliyah. Social media discussions praised the decision, emphasizing the importance of respect, ethical standards, and standing up for one's principles. The wealthy family, on the other hand, faced scrutiny and subtle criticism as their arrogance and dismissive behavior were exposed publicly. The shift in perception highlighted that money alone did not guarantee influence or respect. In the days following the cancellation, Mr. Thompson and Aliyah focused on new opportunities. They began engaging with investors and partners who valued ethics, integrity, and respect, demonstrating that principled leadership could attract the right collaborators. Conversations with alternative investors quickly revealed a surprising result. Several offers exceeded the original $500 million deal. The success underscored a crucial lesson. Upholding principles and integrity could be more rewarding than compromising for immediate gain. Aliyah reflected on the events with a growing sense of maturity. She had witnessed firsthand how courage, intelligence, and calm composure could influence outcomes and shift power dynamics. She understood that business was not solely about numbers, contracts, or wealth. It was about people, respect, and ethical decision-making. Her father's mentorship had shown her the importance of patience, strategy, and principled action, providing invaluable lessons for her future. Throughout this period, Mr. Thompson emphasized the human side of business. He encouraged Aliyah to think beyond profits, to consider the impact of decisions on employees, partners, and society at large. He highlighted how integrity, consistency, and ethical leadership could foster trust and long-term success. Aliyah absorbed these lessons, understanding that true power came from the ability to combine intelligence, ethical judgment, and the courage to act according to principle. The wealthy family, meanwhile, began to experience the consequences of their earlier behavior. Their attempt to rely on wealth and status to secure compliance had failed, and their reputation suffered quietly among peers. Their arrogance had been exposed, and their assumption that money could override principle had been proven wrong. The experience became a cautionary tale within their circles, illustrating the limits of influence when integrity and respect are overlooked. As Part 4 concluded, the outcome was clear. Standing firm in the face of arrogance, prioritizing ethical standards, and maintaining calm composure had resulted in a significant victory. Mr. Thompson had demonstrated that financial opportunities could be foregone when principles were at stake, and Aaliyah had shown that intelligence, observation, and poise could influence complex situations. Together, they had set a precedent for ethical leadership and strategic decision-making, creating a lasting impact that extended beyond the immediate deal. Aaliyah and her father spent quiet evenings reflecting on the journey. They discussed the lessons learned, the importance of strategic patience, and the value of integrity in both business and personal life. They recognized that the experience had strengthened their resolve, deepened their understanding of human behavior, and highlighted the power of principled action. The story was not just about a financial deal. It was about the courage to uphold dignity, the strength of ethical leadership, and the long-term benefits of making decisions aligned with values rather than short-term gain. By the end of Part 4, it was evident that the narrative had shifted, the wealthy family's arrogance had been challenged, the principles of integrity had been affirmed, and the foundation for future opportunities had been strengthened. The combination of strategic intelligence, ethical grounding, and calm composure had created a powerful outcome, setting the stage for the final chapter where recognition, triumph, and lasting respect would define the conclusion of the story. In the days following the cancellation of the $500 million deal, life took on a rhythm of reflection, planning, and quiet triumph for Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah. They both knew that what had occurred was more than just a negotiation. It was a statement about integrity, respect, and courage. Aaliyah had experienced the power of standing firm, and she understood that her role was not just as a daughter observing her father, but as an emerging leader learning to navigate the world of influence with intelligence and dignity. The alternative, investors that Mr. Thompson had reached out to were intrigued by the ethical foundation of his company. They appreciated a business that prioritized respect and integrity, and they recognized the value in partnering with a leader who had the courage to uphold these principles. Aaliyah watched as her father negotiated new deals, observing how trust and transparency were often more persuasive than money alone. It was a revelation that left her inspired and more determined to follow a path guided by principle rather than convenience. As new agreements were finalized, it became clear that the financial outcome of these deals exceeded what had been initially expected. The alternative investors brought resources, connections, and insights that enhanced the company's reach and capability. Mr. Thompson's careful decision to uphold ethical standards had attracted partners who shared the same values, demonstrating that long-term success was more than profit. It was about the people, the culture, and the reputation that one built along the way. Aaliyah began to see the tangible results of her father's guidance. She participated in discussions about strategic planning, branding, and corporate culture. Her opinions were valued, and her insights into observation, human behavior, and ethical decision-making were recognized as important contributions. She realized that her voice could influence outcomes, and that intelligence combined with integrity was a powerful tool. Her confidence grew, not from arrogance, but from a deep understanding of what it meant to lead responsibly. The wealthy family, who had taunted Aaliyah at the gala and underestimated her father, faced a different reality. Their initial expectation that money could dictate behavior had been shattered. They had learned, albeit reluctantly, that arrogance and dismissiveness could lead to consequences beyond their control. Some in their circle whispered about the failure, noting how a young girl and her father had challenged assumptions of power and wealth. It was a humbling lesson, one that underscored the importance of respect and awareness in every interaction. Word of the events began to circulate, quietly at first, then more broadly. Colleagues, industry observers, and even media outlets took note of the unusual circumstances. A self-made CEO who turned down $500 million to uphold ethical standards and respect for his daughter. Aaliyah's composure and intelligence were highlighted as examples of how courage and dignity could influence significant outcomes. People admired that they had not resorted to confrontation, anger, or public humiliation, but instead relied on patience, strategy, and clear principles. Aaliyah spent time reflecting on these events in her personal journal, noting lessons about leadership, human behavior, and the importance of ethics. She wrote about the subtle ways in which influence could be exercised without force, and about how observation, patience, and clear communication could shift power dynamics. She also considered the value of integrity, understanding that short-term losses could sometimes lead to greater long-term gains. Each entry reinforced her understanding that leadership was as much about character as it was about strategy. The father-daughter duo also took moments to connect personally. In quiet evenings at home, they discussed life beyond business, exploring ideas about society, responsibility, and the impact one could have on others. These conversations were not just philosophical, they were practical lessons that grounded Aaliyah in the understanding that every choice had implications. She realized that true influence was rooted in respect for others, clarity of vision, and ethical consistency. The company itself began to experience a transformation. Employees noticed the alignment between leadership decisions and ethical principles. Morale improved, creativity flourished, and there was a renewed sense of purpose across teams. Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah recognized that culture and leadership were inseparable, and that upholding values in challenging situations inspired loyalty, trust, and motivation among employees. The positive impact was tangible, creating a virtuous cycle of success, respect, and engagement. As the weeks passed, Aaliyah's story began to inspire other young professionals, particularly women and minorities who saw themselves represented in her courage, intelligence, and composure. Invitations to speak at conferences, mentorship programs, and business panels began to arrive. She approached these opportunities with humility and confidence, emphasizing the importance of self-respect, ethical decision-making, and strategic patience. Her words resonated, not as lessons imposed, but as guidance drawn from lived experience. Meanwhile, the wealthy family attempted to recover from the public perception of their failure. They faced scrutiny from peers and competitors who had noted the outcome of the canceled deal. Their attempts to regain credibility were cautious, but the narrative of their arrogance and underestimation of Mr. Thompson and Aaliyah had already taken hold. The contrast between wealth without principle and integrity combined with strategy had become clear, and the message resonated throughout the industry. Aaliyah continued to develop her understanding of business and leadership, attending meetings, studying strategic decisions, and learning from both successes and challenges. She became a visible example of how intelligence, preparation, and ethical grounding could influence outcomes. Her confidence was rooted in knowledge and principle, not in bravado or desire for recognition. She learned to navigate complex social and professional situations with poise, demonstrating that courage and composure were powerful tools in any arena. Her father, observing her growth, was quietly proud. He knew that the lessons learned through this experience would shape her future, providing her with insights that could not be taught in classrooms or textbooks. The real-world application of strategy, observation, patience, and ethical leadership had given her a foundation that would serve her for a lifetime. He encouraged her to continue learning, questioning, and reflecting, knowing that true leadership required continual growth and awareness.